Hi, listeners. Welcome to part 1 of my original ASMR slow burn storytelling series called A Game of Power. Set in the high-stakes world of academia at Columbia University, this is a story about seduction, strategy, and the thin, dangerous line between obsession and control. The story isn't about love, not yet. It's about power, about the way one look can unravel everything you thought you knew about yourself, about the quiet thrill of control and the hunger that creeps in when you try to resist it. This is part 1 of A Game of Power. Get comfortable, close the door, and let yourself be pulled under. The air in the lecture hall was thick with anticipation. Not excitement, no, something heavier. An ache, a hum beneath the surface, the scent of ink bleeding onto notebooks, the polish of old wood, and something almost metallic lingered in the room. 75 students waited, not for a lecture, but for her. Dr. Eve Harrington. She didn't just enter a room, she claimed it. She moved with the precision of a predator, all sharp heels and sharper eyes, her leather bag landing on the desk with a soft, controlled thud. She adjusted the cuffs of her white silk blouse, crisp, immaculate, like she was preparing for battle. Every movement she made was deliberate, calculated, and the room bent towards her. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. Her gaze swept the room slowly, and the silence surrendered itself like prey going still before the kill. Pens stilled, breaths caught, eyelids fluttered open just to catch her silhouette in motion. She folded her hands, long fingers, nails painted blood red. That red wasn't for beauty, it was a warning. She had been alone for years. Naomi's ghost locked behind steel doors in her mind. Love wasn't in her vocabulary, control was, strategy, obedience. And then she spoke. Power. One word, precise, unflinching, and the room collectively exhaled. She stepped forward, her heels clicking like a countdown. Power is one of the most intoxicating forces in human history, she said, voice like velvet over steel. It's the heartbeat of war, the pulse of relationships, and the scaffolding of civilization itself. Her lips curved, not a smile, something darker. She picked up a piece of chalk. The scratch against the board was slow, measured, purposeful. Power, control, submission. She didn't explain them. She let the words hang, heavy like breath you didn't know you were holding. People assume power is about strength, she continued. That control is about force, and that submission is weakness. She turned, smirked. They are wrong. A student shifted, one creak of wood in a room that had forgotten how to breathe. Eve's eyes flickered toward the sound, and then a hand. It rose slowly, not hesitant, but deliberate. A flare in the dark. Third row, dark curls, eyes like polished ankhs, curious, cautious, hungry. A pawn necklace rested at that girl's throat. Silver, delicate, too deliberate to be a coincidence. Pawn, The word slid into Eve's mind like a dagger into silk. She didn't flinch, but something deep inside her leaned forward. Yes. Her voice was smooth, clinical, but her focus lasered in on her. The girl's lips parted, then closed, then opened again. She was nervous, brave, but nervous. Dr. Harrington, you said power isn't about force, that it's about influence, but a breath. Can you have power over someone without them ever knowing it? Silence. That question didn't just linger. It clung into the air like perfume, sweet, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Eve's gaze sharpened. She watched the girl's fingers drift to her necklace. Just a touch. A subconscious act of protection or submission. She couldn't tell. Not yet. But her body knew before her mind did that this girl, this Amara Toussaint, wasn't just a student. She was a variable, a trigger. An interesting question, Amira, Eve said. Oh, she savored the name, rolled it around her tongue like the first taste of wine after a long fast. She turned to the board again. Each word she wrote was a verdict, each movement a sentence. Fixation, manipulation, and control. The most powerful kind of control, she said, is the kind they don't notice, the kind they welcome, the kind they believe belongs to them. She turned again, eyes locked, voice lower. You plant a seed, water it with subtlety, feed it with silence, and when they finally bloom, they believe it was always their idea. Amira didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. Eve stepped forward, not toward the class, toward her. That, her voice was a whisper now, a dare, is real power. By the time the lecture ended, Amara Toussaint felt like she'd been set adrift inside her own body. Her notebook was filled with Eve's words, her theories, her voice, her commands, but none of it made sense. Not anymore. Not when her hands were still trembling. She moved on instinct, mechanical, pen into her bag, notebook closed, jacket over her shoulder. The other students filtered out in pairs and trios, laughing, sighing, already forgetting everything that had just happened. But Amira didn't move. She sat still, as if the room itself had laced invisible threads around her ankles, anchoring her to the floor. She told herself that she wasn't being ridiculous, that this was just a lecture, a good one, a memorial one, nothing more. Then, Amira, one word, her name spoken like a secret. She froze. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Not when Eve Harrington said it. Amira turned slowly, like the floor might shift beneath her if she moved too fast. Eve stood just a few feet away, closer than she should be. Too close for this to be professional, too close for this to be safe. I didn't get to call on you again. Her voice was even, but her eyes were interrogating. Your question was interesting. There was no warmth in the praise, only pressure, only pull. You don't believe power is always visible, do you? Amira opened her mouth, closed it again. Her throat felt dry. Her words refused to come. Eve smiled, Not kind, not cruel, but knowing. You think deeply, she said. A statement, not a compliment. A reading, a dissection. Amara's fingers clenched around her notebook. She needed to move, to leave, to breathe. But then Eve stepped forward. Not by much, just enough. You'll do well in this class. Her voice was velvet dipped in something darker, something heavy. She turned away with surgical precision, heels clicking softly against the polished floor, and disappeared through the door without looking back. Amara stood there, alone, skin prickling, breath shallow, heart pounding, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know if she was afraid or thrilled. The door clicked shut behind her. Amara didn't even remember deciding to walk there. Her body moved before her mind caught up. Drawn, compelled, caught in the orbit of something she hadn't even named yet. Eve didn't speak right away. She just looked at her. The office was warm, too warm. Books lined the walls like silent witnesses. The scent of sandalwood and ink hung to the air like a spell. Amara cleared her throat, but her voice didn't come. Eve circled her desk slowly, like a lion tracing the perimeter of its cage. Except Eve wasn't in a cage. Why are you here? The question wasn't curious. It was rhetorical. A test, a weapon. Amara swallowed hard. I wanted to ask. Eve held up a hand, a single sharp gesture that cut her off mid-sentence. No lies. Her voice was like velvet over ice. You came because you want me to do something you're too afraid to ask for. Amara's breath caught. She felt it in her chest, her belly, between her thighs. You think I haven't seen your type before? Eve's heels clicked as she came closer. 1 step, 2, 3, until Amara could feel her breath against her skin. Curious, careful, always watching, always waiting for permission. She leaned in, her lips brushing the shell of Amara's ear. But now you're in my space, and I don't ask. Amara shivered, her hands curled into fists. Still, she didn't move. You want to feel power? Eve's voice dropped, dangerously low. Then kneel. Amara froze. You heard me. Silence. And then Amara's knees hit the plush rug with a soft thud. Eve let out the faintest hum of approval. Look at you. She moved around her like a sculptor, admiring her latest piece. So pretty when you're obedient. So easy to break when someone finally sees you. She reached down, 2 fingers under Amara's chin, lifting her face. Eyes on me. Their gaze locked. Amara's chest was heavying, lips parted, eyes wide. You don't belong in control. Not here. Eve stepped between her knees, looking down at her like she was both a prize and a project. You came into my office thinking you could figure me out, that you'd be the exception, the one I'd hesitate for. She leaned down, so close Amara could feel her smirk ghost across her lips. But you were wrong. Eve gripped a fistful of Amara's curls, tugging just enough to tilt her head back, exposing her neck. You belong to the game now, and I always play to win. Are you still pretending you came here for a question? Eve's voice was quiet, too quiet. Danger wrapped in silk. She stepped closer, hands on the edge of her desk, leaning in, towering over Amara, who still knelt, obedient, trembling, but burning. You knelt without hesitation, she smirked. That tells me everything. Her fingers slid down Amara's jaws, tracing her throat, lingering there. Not choking, just holding, claiming. You're mine now, and you're going to feel what it means to be wanted by someone who doesn't need to ask. Eve's hand drifted lower, knuckles grazing the curve of Amara's chest through her blouse. Not enough, just a ghost of pressure, enough to make her ache. Do you feel that? She leaned in, lips brushing Amara's ears. That heat in your stomach, the tension in your thighs, that's the price of coming into my world. Amara whimpered. It slipped out, unguarded, raw. And Eve grinned, not sweet, but predatory. You want to beg already. We haven't even started. She pulled Amara up by the wrist, swift, commanding, pressing her back against the desk. Amara's breath hitched, eyes wide as Eve caged her in with one hand braced behind her head. You wore this little skirt hoping I noticed, didn't you? Her fingers dragged along the hem, teasing and taunting, thinking you were subtle, thinking you had control. She pushed a knee between Amara's thighs, forcing them apart. Slow, cruel, delicious. You're dripping for me. She smiled, letting the words slide out like honey, without a single kiss, without a single demand. Eve reached behind Amara, tugging her against her chest, lips at her throat. What does this say about you? A whisper, a threat, a promise. Amara's hands gripped the edge of the desk, shaking, kneading, and Eve was calm, focused, and dangerously gentle. I could make you come without even touching you properly. A pause. Would you like that? She pressed her thighs against the heat between Amara's legs. A slow grind, subtle, exquisite. Amara moaned, helpless. Eve tilted her chin again, forcing eye contact. No hiding, not from me. Her voice was pure dominance now. You're going to look at me while you fall apart. And when you do, she pressed in, harder, perfect. You'll know who you belong to. I can't stop thinking about her, not even for a second. It's stupid. She's older, brilliant, sharp, terrifying, and I'm just a girl with too many questions and not enough armor. I walked into her class like everyone else, notebook in hand, eyes down, ready to disappear. But the moment she spoke, God, I felt like she saw me. Not just the way professors are supposed to, not kindly, not warmly. No, she saw through me, cut straight into the parts I've spent years trying to hide. And she never even raised her voice. Her words wrapped around me like silk, and still. And I wanted to resist. I should have, but I didn't. I couldn't. And when she said my name, just my name, it felt like permission, like possession. Why does she look at me like that? Like I'm already hers, like she's already decided. I want to run. I want to stay. I want her to stop, and I want her to never stop. I've never wanted anyone like this, not with this ache, not with this heat that sits in my stomach and burns every time I think of her mouth, her voice, her hands. She didn't even touch me, and I came home aching. I should be angry. I should be afraid. But all I feel is this hunger and fear, because I think if she asked me to do anything, I'd say yes, even if it ruins me, especially if it ruins me.